A good vach, my holy sisters and brothers. Shavua Tov. We wish each other a good week. As we enter the new week, we're leaving Shabbos, and we bless the Holy One for distinguishing between sacred and secular in the Havdalah ceremony, which, what's his name? Nathanael Hirschtek was singing along with the Maccabees. How are you doing? Let's light up the darkness with our new wisdom candle, opening a great new week. A week that, unless something crazy happens, will be leaving this tractate Shekalim, the 5th volume of the Talmud, and opening the 6th volume tractate Yoma, about the laws of Yom Kippur. Who is with us as we get it going on a Saturday night? Bill in Berkeley, Paul in Chicago, Fred in Miami Beach, Gail in Virginia, Jonathan in the Twin Cities, Minnesota. Joy wishing us all Shavua Tov from the Valley. I assume you mean north of LA. Ann in Merced. Michael in New Jersey. Gwen wishing us a good evening. Lila Tov. Fred wishing us a good week. Loretta, shalom from Oregon. Tracy in Oklahoma. John, Candle, got it. John from Surfside Beach in South Carolina. Welcome, everybody. It's great to be together. I thought I would just do a couple of quick things before we start our page of Talmud for the evening. We've been counting the Omer, and yesterday we counted 13 nights. I'm not going to say what I'm going to count tonight before I count it, because then I would have counted it. So at the end of evening services for these 50 days between the second day of Passover, when we bring the Omer offering, the barley offering of the new grain of the year, as we read in Tractate Pesachim. And then we count 50 days, and then it'll be Shavuos, when we celebrate the giving of Torah at Mount Sinai, and when we bring the 2 loaves, an offering made of wheat. And so these 7 weeks are considered a time of refinement, refining our character as we sort of elevate ourselves from a barley offering, which is animal food, technically, right, in the ancient world, and climb up to eat human food, right? As we eat wheat, as we eat bread. And it's definitely a time of personal character refinement. And as I've discussed recently, it's a mitzvah to refine your character according to Maimonides. Where is that commandment spelled out in the Torah that we should improve ourselves? You shall walk in his ways. God is patient, so we should cultivate patience in ourselves. God is slow to anger. God is kind. God is generous. God shows good judgment. All of the things that are kind of the possibly anthropomorphic qualities of God, the way he relates to us, always with justice, with fairness, with kindness, with long-suffering patience. These are qualities that we should emulate, and they don't come natural to us because we're so ruled by our animal nature, and so we have to work at refining our character. And we particularly think about character refinement as we count the Omer. So let's count the Omer together tonight. I am prepared and ready to fulfill the positive commandment of counting the Omer. As is written in the Torah, you shall count 7 complete weeks from the day following the Pesach rest day, the rest day, when you brought the Omer as a wave offering. That's in Leviticus 23. To the day after the 7th week, you shall count 50 days, and then you shall present a meal offering of new grain to the Lord. May the pleasantness of the Lord, our God, be upon us. Establish for us the work of our hands. Establish the work of our hands. I'll say the blessing in English first. Blessed are you, Lord, our God, King of the universe, who has made us holy through his commandments and has commanded us about counting the Omer. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu al sefiras ha'omer. Today is the 14th day of the Omer, making 2 weeks of the Omer. And on this day, we meditate. Each week has a meditation, a topic that we meditate. It's a Kabbalistic type of meditation. The first week we meditate on the attribute of chesed, loving kindness, and each day a sort of permutation of loving kindness. Now we're completing the second week, and this whole week we've been meditating on Gevura. Chesed and Gevura. Chesed is the right hand, Gevura is the left hand, and these are kind of like the primary attributes through which God sends, his blessing and life force into this world and sustains us through God's kindness and God's judgment. And we emulate his ways. We want to cultivate both of these in balance. We want to always express loving kindness to other people. But we have to be careful because loving kindness, it can be overdone and can actually lead us into quite a wrong way. Loving kindness can be overdone, and so it's balanced with good judgment. Gevura, and today's meditation is the Malchus of Gevura. Malchus is sovereignty. So we ask, what is sovereign in our lives? What values are we pursuing? In what ways are we emulating the Lord? And we ask his help. We want to be of service to God and God's creatures. So we allow God to rule over us. And today, as we sort of ask God to help us lock in this trait of good judgment, Gevura, that we have been meditating on this whole week as we count the Omer. May the compassionate one restore the temple service to its place speedily in our days. Amen. Selah. And that's how we conclude the counting of the Omer. There's also some psalms that people can add. But isn't it interesting? May the service of the temple be restored in our days. Selah. I mean, what does that have to do with counting the Omer? Well, because that's where we brought the Omer. We haven't really been able to bring the Omer since the temple was standing. And so this is one of the many, many mitzvahs that we are not able to fulfill. One of the many commandments we're not able to fulfill until the temple shall be rebuilt. The third temple will come when Mashiach comes and ushers in the Messianic age, which we're all, been longing for 2,000 years, so that we would be restored to our homeland spiritually, right, with a complete restoration. The dawning of that age, some say, is the state of Israel, which is beautiful, and we're so thankful for it. But it won't really be the restoration of Israel until the temple is standing in Jerusalem. I also wanted to say that today in Shul, and I'm the Gabbai of our little minyan, we made the blessing over the new month. We are leaving Nisan, the month that contains Passover in it during this whole month. It's a month of miracles, and we don't recite Tachanun, where we sort of admit our sins every morning, except Shabbos and holidays, and the whole month of Nisan. So we're going to be leaving Nisan soon. And so it was my job to announce the Molad today in Shul, that the exact time when the new month of Iyar, the Hebrew month of Iyar, will be beginning. And when it begins in Jerusalem is the Molad for the whole world. And it's going to be a 2-day Rosh Chodesh. And then Moshe Storch and our minyan sang this so beautifully. I can't sing it, but I'm just going to read it to you in case you haven't heard the blessings of the new month as they are recited in Shabbos Mevarchim. The Shabbos before the Rosh Chodesh is when we make the blessings for the new month during the Torah service on a Saturday morning service. And so this is what we said today. We chanted in Hebrew, "May it be your will, Lord our God and God of our fathers, to renew for us this coming month for good and blessing. Grant us long life, a life of peace, a life of goodness, a life of blessing, a life of sustenance, a life of physical health, a life marked by reverence for heaven and dread of sin, a life without shame or disgrace, a life of wealth and honor, a life in which we have love for the Torah and reverence for heaven, a life in which the Lord will fulfill all of our heart's desires for good. Amen. Salah." And then I announced this morning in our minyan, the Molad, the new moon for Rosh Chodesh Iyar, the new month of Iyar, is Monday morning at 7:47 a.m. and 6 halakim, 6 portions. May he who performed miracles for our ancestors and redeemed them from slavery to freedom redeem us soon and gather in our dispersed people from the four quarters of the earth, so that all Israel may be united in friendship. And let us say Amen. And then the new month of Iyar will occur on Monday and Tuesday. It's a 2-day Rosh Chodesh this week. May it come to us and all Israel for good. May the Holy One, blessed be He, renew this month for us and for all His people, the house of Israel, for life and peace, gladness and joy, salvation and consolation. And let us say Amen. All right, let's get to our study for tonight. We are going to be completing chapter 6 tonight here in Tractate Shekalim. This is Daf Yud Ches, page 18. 18 often associated with life, Chai, because those letters, Ches and Yud, backwards spell Chai, life. So life, right? So this is a page of life, beautiful. And we're actually starting at the bottom of 17. And this chapter has been specifically about the horns and the tables and the candelabras we're going to be talking about tonight in the temple. But we had that fascinating digression about the Ark of the Covenant, which was stored in the Holy of Holies in the temple. And it was sequestered, hidden away before the destruction of the first temple, and has not been seen since. And so the sages were debating whether it was taken out of the Temple Mount or hidden in the Temple Mount, and some of the clues about that. If you missed that page, you want to go back and hear that class, page 16 of Tractate Shekalim. All right, here doing page 18 and starting near the bottom of 17. The Gemara cites a Baraisa that discusses the showbread table. The showbreads were baked once a week. There were 12 large loaves of unleavened bread folded over on the ends, stacked on a table. Was it one table or multiple tables? We're going to be discussing now. But they sat in the temple for a week, and then the priests the priest that served during that week would eat them on Shabbos, and the new loaves would be brought in on Shabbos as well. Where did they sit? Not in the courtyard, but in the sanctuary. So we'll be talking about that quite a bit today. So here's a little figure of a plan of the temple, as it were. And you see that there's an entrance hall, and then there's the sanctuary, and then there's the Holy of Holies. Inside the Holy of Holies, you would have the Ark of the Covenant. And then you have the golden altar right there in the middle of the sanctuary. And you can't see it very well, but it's the candelabra there, just a small object near the curtain of the Holy of Holies, and the table of the showbreads. Then the entrance hall and the stairs goes out to the courtyard of the temple. Okay, so the Gemara is going to cite a Baraisa that says about the showbread table, that King Solomon, built 10 tables for the temple and modeled after the showbread table. So recall that the temple was finally built by Solomon. David wanted to build it. God basically said to David through the prophet that, you're not going to build a temple. Your son is going to build a temple, but don't worry, I'm giving you the ultimate blessing as a king. The scepter, the throne, the crown of Israel will never depart from your family. And that's why the Mashiach, when he comes and becomes king of Israel, when the Messiah comes, he will be a descendant of King David. So it was Solomon who built the temple, but that was 400 years later than Sinai, right? So after we received the Torah at Sinai, and they built the tabernacle in the desert. So the temple is built as a sort of expansion, elaboration, and aggrandized version of the tabernacle. But the tabernacle that we carried with us in the wilderness, and then which stood in Israel for all those hundreds of years. So in that time, there was also a Holy of Holies. It was in a tent rather than a permanent structure. But there was the Holy of Holies, and there was the sanctuary, and there was the candelabra, or the menorah, the golden menorah, and the showbread table, and the golden altar of the incense, which were all located in the sanctuary of the tabernacle. And eventually, right, David sort of picked the spot, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and started making the plans, but it was Solomon who realized the vision. So Solomon built 10 tables for the temple, modeled after the showbread table. As it is written, he made also 10 tables and placed them in the temple, 5 on the right side and 5 on the left. Now we're going to skip around a little bit, as is our practice. We don't read every sentence of the page. It would just often it would get too much into the weeds. And there's going to be quite a bit of discussion here of, well, there's 10 tables. Was there showbreads on all 10 tables, or did they just fulfill the obligation to put 12 showbreads on one table, as they did in the time of Moses, and as they did in the second temple? Right after the first temple was destroyed, there was the Babylonian exile. The exiles eventually came back, led by Ezra and Nehemiah, and they rebuilt a temple. They built the second temple, but the second temple was humbler. And there were the sort of constant miracles of the first temple were not present in the second temple. They still brought offerings. They still did all kinds of stuff. But they had one table of showbread and one menorah, like they did in the time of Moses. Solomon's temple was grander in every way. And so there were these 10 gold tables that were in the sanctuary. And so the question is, where were they located? And did they have bread on all of them, is what the sages discussed. And since the Torah already instructed that the showbread table would be on the north side of the sanctuary, so where were these other 10 tables? So even so, despite the fact that there were so many tables in the sanctuary, the priest would arrange the showbread only on the table of Moses alone, as it is stated. And Solomon made all the vessels that were in the house of the Lord, the golden altar, and the table whereupon the showbread was of gold. This is 1 Kings 7:48. The use of the definite article the table indicates that there was one unique table upon which the showbread was arranged, the table of Moses. Conversely, Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, says he would arrange the showbread on all of the tables, each one in turn, as it is stated, and the tables upon which was the showbread. This verse indicates that the showbread was placed on multiple tables. And they don't really come to a conclusion. Do we know for sure whether in Solomon's time they were putting bread on all 10 tables or just the one table? We're not sure. The sages are much more familiar with what was going on in the second temple, because the Mishna, there were rabbis of the Mishna who were already contributing to the Mishna, as it were, during the second temple period, and they saw what was going on there. But what was going on, 470 years earlier, up until not 870 years earlier, they're not so sure. And it stands to reason. I mean, when you think about, you get an image in your mind of colonial America, right? Colonial America before the Revolutionary War, right after the Revolutionary War. That seems so distant and a time unimaginably different from us. Single-shot muskets. The number one job, the number one profession in America was farmer. There was, much less people in America. No cars, no radios, no TV. I mean, a world so different than ours. Okay, so that was 250 years, not even 250 years ago. Each temple stood for over 400 years. And the two of them together with the 70-year break, 900 years, basically 900 years. And that comes after the tabernacle served as the center of Jewish expression through the sacrifices being brought on the altar by the priest, etc., for another 400 years. I mean, when you talk about the Jews are kind of an eternal people, eternity in this world is almost a meaningless concept, since this world is so finite, unlike the eternal world where all our souls come from. But nevertheless, Jewish history is vast, just vast. And so you can understand that the sages did not have perfect records of what was going on in earlier periods, and that's why they speculated on it so much. The golden altar, now we're on page 18. The golden altar was situated in the middle of the house, dividing the house from its halfway point and inward. Equidistant from the north and south walls, and slightly drawn back from the place of the temple and the candelabrum toward the outside. Since the length of the entire area of the sanctuary, of the temple itself, the inner temple, was 60 cubits, 20 for the Holy of Holies and 40 for the sanctuary. All the vessels were situated from a third of the entire house and inward. In other words, the vessels were all contained in the second third of the entire area, in that middle third, as we saw in this figure. The golden altar there in the sanctuary, the table of the showbreads, and that thin little thing beneath the red curtain is the candelabrum, the menorah, the golden menorah. King Solomon, doing everything on a grand scale, King Solomon constructed 10 candelabra, 10 menorahs, right? This is the 7-branched menorah, the golden menorah, that the priests would light every morning and make sure they would renew the oil. In the Hanukkah story, right, they after the war of the Maccabees, and they recaptured the temple, and all the oil had been desecrated, and they didn't have enough oil to put in the bowls of the 7-branched candelabra, in order to fulfill their obligation to literally light up the darkness of the world with this light that shines from the temple in Jerusalem. When King Solomon built the temple, he constructed 10 more of these large golden candelabra, modeled on the one that Moses crafted, as it is stated. And he made the 10 candlesticks of gold, according to the ordinance concerning them, and he set them in the sanctuary, 5 on the right and 5 on the left. Very similar discussion to these additional tables of the showbreads. And if you say that right and left refer to the sides of the entrance of the sanctuary, you have this problem, because God had already specified in the Torah that the candelabra needs to be on the south side of the sanctuary. And so now there's these additional 10. Where do they go? If they somehow end up in the north side of the sanctuary, then they violate this part of the law. Even so, despite the fact that there were so many candelabra in the sanctuary, the priest would kindle only the candelabrum of Moses alone, the original menorah, as it is stated, and the candelabrum of gold with its lamps to burn every evening. Not from the Torah there, not from the 5 books of Moses, but from the 2nd book of Chronicles 13:11. The singular form indicates that only one candelabrum was lit. Conversely, Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, says he would kindle all 11 candelabra, 1 of Moses and 10 of Solomon, each one in turn, as it is stated, and the candelabra with their lamps, that they should burn according to the ordinance before the sanctuary of pure gold. So were they lighting one? Were they lighting all of them? I mean, here's a note from Rav Steinsaltz. King Solomon placed 10 candelabra and 10 tables in the temple because the area of the sanctuary he built was more than 10 times larger than that of the tabernacle. The tabernacle was 30 by 10 cubits. Solomon's sanctuary was 60 by 20 cubits. Consequently, whereas 1 candelabrum sufficed for the tabernacle, the temple required 11. Furthermore, as the Torah dictates that the candelabrum in the tent of meeting was to be situated opposite the table, an equivalent number of tables in the temple were required. An equivalent number was required. So he did it essentially, it offended his sense of design to have such a large space empty. So he filled it with copies of the original candelabra and copies of the original table of the showbreads. Did the priests light those bowls? Did they put showbreads on those additional tables? They have a dispute. It's unclear. We continue. The Gemara cites a related baraisa. Rav Yehuda taught in the name of the sage Asi, Solomon would take 1,000 talents of gold and insert them into the crucible and remove them. And he repeated this process until the gold was so refined that he established its weight as 1 talent of gold to fill that which is stated about the original candelabrum in the tabernacle. Of a talent of pure gold made he it. Exodus 37:24. So somehow in the desert, Moses, with the help of his craftsman Bezalel, and obviously with the help of the Almighty, who made it possible for them to do this work while wandering in the wilderness, right? Portable while camping. They didn't have the tools, the massive blacksmithy. And yet they were able to refine the gold that was used in the original candelabrum until it was absolutely pure, no impurities whatsoever. In King Solomon's time, when he was a vastly wealthy king with all the resources of a nation at his disposal, he sought to make the gold as refined as the original gold. And it took a tremendous amount of work and refining and melting it down and running it through the crucible and getting all the impurities out over and over and over again. And there was a lot of waste, and they actually, lost a lot of gold going through that refining process, as we're being told here. And it was taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, said there was an incident involving the candelabrum of gold that Moses made in the desert, which exceeded the weight set by the Torah, 1 talent, by 1 dinar of gold. So they needed to have 1 talent of gold, that measure, and they had just a little bit of extra gold. And so rather than just, take away that much extra gold, what they said is, well, maybe the reason we have this little bit of extra is because there are impurities in the gold. And they inserted it into the crucible 80 times to further refine it and reduce its weight, but it was not reduced by anything. And this is proper, for as long as it had not achieved its correct state of purity, it would decrease greatly, as its refinement in the crucible removed all the impurities, thereby reducing its weight. However, from when it had achieved its correct state of purity, it was not reduced at all. And unlike the gold of Moses, the gold that Solomon used was not originally free of impurity, and therefore it required additional refinement. That concludes our discussion of the third Mishnah in chapter 6. And now we open the final Mishnah of chapter 6. This is the fourth Mishnah of chapter 6. There were 13 collection horns in the temple, and the intended use of the funds was written upon each one as follows: new shekels, old shekels, pairs of birds, fledglings designed for burnt offerings, wood for the arrangement of the fire on the altar, frankincense that accompanied meal offerings, and gold donated for the ark covering. And the remaining 6 horns were designated for communal free will offerings. The horn labeled new shekels was designated for the half shekel donation that was brought every year for the needs of that year. And the horn labeled old shekels was for one who did not bring his half shekel the previous year, who would contribute his shekel for the following year. We've seen that those 2 horns, the new shekel and old shekels, those were available at all the donation points during the month of Adar, the month before Nisan, when they would do this annual collection of the half shekels, which is what this tractate Shekalim is all about. But if you actually went to the temple itself to make your donation, so there were additional horns, as we see. The funds in the horn-labeled pairs of birds are designated for the turtle doves used for bird offerings, and the one labeled fledglings for burnt offerings are used to purchase young pigeons as burnt offerings. All of these, i.e. the funds in both horns, were used exclusively for voluntary burnt offerings. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. And the rabbis say the funds in both the horn-labeled pairs of birds and the horn-labeled fledglings were for young pigeons and turtle doves. And the distinction between them is that the funds in the horn-labeled pairs of birds were designated for the obligatory offerings of a zav and a zava, people who had experienced certain kinds of bodily emissions, a woman after childbirth, and a leper, meaning one who has the mitzora, the one who has tzara'as, not modern leprosy, but the physical manifestation of a spiritual malady, often caused by lashon hara, evil tongue, gossiping, using the power of speech, which distinguishes us from the animals, for harsh and wicked purposes. Where am I? These offerings include and a leper. And these offerings included a pair of birds, one brought for a sin offering and the other one brought for a burnt offering. Conversely, the funds in the horn-labeled fledglings for burnt offerings were all used exclusively for voluntary burnt offerings. This is all the Mishnah. One who says it is incumbent upon me to donate wood to the temple must donate no fewer than 2 logs for the arrangement on the altar. Must give no fewer than 2 logs for the arrangement on the altar. One who says it is incumbent upon me to donate frankincense must donate no less than a handful of frankincense. Meaning, if somebody wants to make a gift to the temple, and he wants to be specific, not just a money gift, but he says, okay, I am going to consecrate wood for the altar. I'm going to donate wood to the temple for use in the pyre on the altar. So then this person has to give at least 2 logs. If he's saying he's going to donate frankincense, he has to give a handful. If he says it is incumbent upon me to donate gold, he must donate no less than a dinar of gold, a coin. It was stated that 6 horns were designated for the communal freewill offerings, and the Mishnah asked, with regard to the money designated for communal freewill offerings, what would they do with this money? And the Mishnah answers that they use it to purchase the animals for burnt offerings, as the meat from these offerings was offered on the altar to God, and the hides were given to the priests. That was a perk of being a priest, serving your day of the week during your 1 or 2 weeks of the year that you served. And the Midrash was taught by Jehoiada, the high priest, Jehoiada. And there is an apparent contradiction between 2 verses. With regard to the guilt offering, the verse states, it is a guilt offering. He is certainly guilty before the Lord. And this indicates that the guilt offering goes to God, not to the priests. However, a different verse states, as is the sin offering, so is the guilt offering. There is one law for them. The priest who makes atonement with it, he shall have it. Leviticus 7:7. And this verse indicates that the offering is designated for the priests. How can these verses be reconciled? And the Mishnah explains that this is the principle. Any funds that come due to a sin offering or due to a guilt offering, i.e. leftover coins designated for one of these offerings, they should be used for the purchase of animals for a voluntary burnt offering, as the meat will be offered on the altar to God, and the hides will go to the priests. In this manner, the 2 verses are found to be fulfilled, as it is both a guilt offering to God as well as a guilt offering to the priest. And this halacha also explains the verse that says the guilt offering money and the sin offering money was not brought into the house of the Lord, it was for the priests. And 2 Kings 12:17, this verse is understood to refer to the hides that are given to the priests. That was the Mishnah. Now we open the Gemara. It was taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yehuda said there was no collection horn for pairs of birds in the temple in Jerusalem due to mixtures, the problem of mixtures. The concern was that perhaps one of the women obligated to bring a pair of birds would die after putting her money in the horn. And if that happens, it would turn out that the funds for sin offerings left to die are mixed with the rest of the money in the horn. And when the owner of funds designated for sin offering passes away, the designated money cannot be used for some other sin offering, and nobody else can bring that sin offering because the person who was obligated to bring it has died. And so, as we've seen this before, that money is supposed to be tossed into the Dead Sea because it can't be used for anything. It's consecrated and it cannot be deconsecrated. Since there's no way to distinguish between the coins, so if that money was mixed in with a collection horn that had all these other coins in it, and you don't know which is which, then you would have to throw all those coins into the Dead Sea. But the Gemara raises a difficulty against this idea. But wasn't it taught in a Baraisa with regard to a woman who said, it is incumbent upon me to bring a pair of birds, that she brings the funds for the purchase of a pair of birds to the temple, and she places those funds in the collection horn. And after she has ritually immersed for her purification, and the sun has set, she may eat consecrated foods. In other words, she has completed her purification process. She is now tahor, ritually pure. She can eat consecrated foods. And she has completed her consecration. Even though she didn't bring the pair of birds on the altar, she didn't see those birds brought up on the altar. All she had to do was put her money in the collection horn, and that is enough. And after she has ritually immersed, for her purification, the sun has set, she may eat consecrated foods. And she need not be concerned that perhaps the priest was lazy and neglected to sacrifice her offering, which would cause her to lack atonement and be prohibited from eating sacrificial food. And the priest need not be concerned that perhaps one of the women who placed funds in his horn has died, which would mean that the funds for sin offerings left to die are mixed with the rest of the coins. Since this ruling is undisputed, it is evidently accepted by all the sages, even Rabbi Yehuda. If so, how can it be claimed that Rabbi Yehuda said there were no horns for obligatory pairs of birds due to the concern that one of the women who placed money in there had died? And the Gemara answers, well, when we say that the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, we are referring to a case where it is known that one of the women had died. Not that she might have died, and that's a problem, but we know that one of those women died. And which means that the funds she gave have the status of a sin offering whose owner has certainly died. And in this case, the coins definitely cannot be used for an offering, and they invalidate the other coins with which they are mingled in the horn. To avoid this scenario, Rabbi Yehuda maintains that there was no horn for obligatory pairs of birds. The Gemara asks, but even if we say that there is a concern that the horn contains invalidated coins, the following remedy can be applied. Let us select 4 zuz, the value of 1 pair of birds, and declare that these are the invalidated coins and throw them into the river so that they will be destroyed and the remainder of coins in the horn will be permitted. If so, even according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, there should be no problem with a horn specifically to collect funds for pairs of birds. And the Gemara answers, let me just plug that in over there. And the Gemara answers, this is not an effective solution according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, because we generally say Rabbi Yehuda does not accept the principle of retroactive designation. You can't, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can't come in it later and say we're going to just take out 4 coins to represent the 4 coins that she put in, because we don't know which are the 4 coins that she put in, and he doesn't accept this principle of retroactive designation, which he's in the minority on. The other sages do accept that. According to Rabbi Yehuda, a doubtful state of affairs cannot be clarified retroactively. Consequently, one cannot resolve this problem by setting aside 4 zuz, and he maintains that there was no horn for obligatory pairs of birds. But he's in the minority on that. And see, they're arguing about what must have been the case historically, because we don't have a good record that proves what was really going on back there. And so he says, no, it must have been like this or it must have been like that. But the sages disagree with him. We're going to skip forward. And I'm on the B side of page 18 now. Rabbi Yosei said, from the statement of Rabbi Illa, that the measurement of a handful of frankincense for a freewill offering is derived from the handful that came with the showbread, which is measured according to the handful of the largest of the priests. Right, so when along with the showbreads, there was frankincense on the table of the showbreads, and it had to be a handful. Whose handful? The largest priest, to make sure that it had the maximum amount that it would still satisfy a handful. So according to that opinion, it can be said that one who donates incense brings it according to the measure of the handful of a priest who has the largest hands, not the handful of the one who brings it. And Rabbi Chizkiah said in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah, one who donates incense can approximate the handful of any priest and even use the handful of the owner who's giving that donation. The Mishnah taught that one who pledges gold without specifying the amount must donate no less than a dinar, a coin of gold. Rabbi Lazar said, and this is the case if he mentioned a form by saying it is incumbent upon me to bring a gold coin. If so, then the minimum he must bring is a standard gold coin, which was the dinar. However, if he did not mention a form, if he said, I will donate gold, rather than I will donate gold coins or a gold coin, if he just said, I will donate gold to the temple, so then he just has to donate gold, and he can bring even a tiny amount of gold, even a small hook of any size. And then Rambam Maimonides has a very nice comment on this. If one says it is incumbent upon me to bring silver, or it is incumbent upon me to bring gold, without mentioning the word coin, he is obligated to bring silver or gold as follows. he adds to the measure until he can definitively state, I did not intend to bring that much. And the halakha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar. Right? So if you say you're going to donate and you don't, and now I'm done, by the way, so if you have comments or questions, get them in now. But isn't that a beautiful idea when you didn't think how much you're going to donate and you just said you would donate? So then the time to donate comes. And this happens now, right? When you have a charity to donate to and you said, I'm going to support that charity. But you didn't decide how much you're going to donate to them. So when the moment comes, you should sort of sit down and decide, okay, like if you actually had cash, you could like start counting the money or just start placing the money in a pile. And then basically you have to say, like, how much did I intend when I said I'm going to support that charity? Because at that moment you consecrated that money for this cause. It's not really consecration like donating to the temple, which the money acquires actual holiness. But it's a good principle. So you just start putting money in front of you until you say, did I mean that much? Did I mean that much? Did I mean that much? Okay, I definitely did not mean that much. And then take away the last bit that you added, and then that pile is what you need to donate to the charity that you said you would support. That's how you fulfill your pledge. Isn't that a great idea? Okay, let's get to comments and questions. Bill Eldridge. I can't recall what became of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, after Solomon built the temple. Obviously, it was still holy, so it couldn't simply be discarded, but it also wasn't needed anymore for what it was created for. I don't have that answer handy. Leah Urso said, I heard it may be buried in Shiloh. I mean, it stood in Shiloh for many years. Also, there was like a kind of like a temporary house, or at least it was by a priest's house, I think in Gibeon. There were like a few different locations during those 400 years, right, before there were kings. This was the time of the judges, when the judges were the leaders of Israel, when we were in the Holy Land, but before the first king, Saul, was appointed because the people demanded a king, which is, you know, it was not ideal. God is our king. What do we need a king for? But they demanded, and eventually Saul was given to them. He turned out to be unworthy of the throne. And then David was given the throne, and the line of David will forever be the kings of Israel. So did the tabernacle itself last for 400 years? Maybe. I mean, there were miraculous properties about it, but it was a tent, you know, it was a tent. So maybe they kept renewing the cloths, the covers, etc. Or maybe they had it stored away and they actually, you know, they weren't locating everything in the tent anymore. It's a little bit unclear. I'm sorry, I haven't done my research, so I should have ready answers to these questions. But clearly, you know, it didn't have that permanent structure until Solomon built it. Lynn says, did all the loaves that went to the altar during the 49 days of the Omer convert to barley, the high priest's daily 12 loaves, mincha, etc., or were some loaves still made of old wheat prior to Shavuos? Lynn, that's such a good question. I'm sorry. You know, I wish that I was such a well-educated, accidental Talmudist that I had the answer to that question on the tip of my tongue. That would just require further research. I mean, we don't bring offerings from the new wheat until Shavuos. So what are they making the old loaves out of? Or maybe they were using new. I suspect that if there was wheat from the new grain, they were making the loaves from that, and that's different than the specific offering of Shavuos. But that's just me talking. I'm not sure. What I never heard. I don't recall hearing anywhere that they switched to barley for those loaves. That would only be made from the finest wheat. So was it made from the old wheat, or was it made from the new wheat? Even though I have this idea that we don't bring meal offerings until Shavuos, right? So I'm not sure. I'd have to research further. But at any rate, we're going to get answers to these questions, I'm sure, later in our journey, because we haven't really been studying the offerings themselves, and we will study them in quite a bit of depth later on in our Daf Yomi journey. Okay, that's what I've got for us tonight. May we all be blessed with an illuminating and joyful and kind and good judgment week. Also, we counted 14 days of the Omer tonight, so we completed our meditations on the first week, on Chesed, on the second week, on Gevura, this whole day. Tomorrow, we counted 14 days tonight. That that covers tomorrow during the day, but tomorrow night would be the next number, and then we'll start a meditation on the third attribute of the 7 lower attributes in the Kabbalah, in the Eitz Chaim, the tree of life. And that third attribute is Tiferet, which is a kind of beauty or harmony, a balancing of Gevura and Chesed, and we'll be meditating on that this whole coming week. So this is the final day where we meditate on Gevura, and it's making God's Gevura along with God's Chesed and God's self sovereign in our lives, right? We really have to think about that to make it so. Since God is quiet and doesn't speak to us, we're not prophets, there's not godly manifestations all the time. It's on us to make God sovereign in our lives, to make sure that we're being of service to the Lord and God's creatures in the way